Good morning. Thank you for joining Cal Competes Degrees of Value webinar. I'm Amanda De La Rosa. I'm Director of Program and Strategy at College Futures Foundation. College Futures is a private, nonprofit foundation focused on rebuilding the California dream for everyone. Everything we do is anchored in a pursuit of equitable economic mobility in California and a belief that our post-secondary system is capable of delivering more value for more learners in more places. The group of leaders that you'll hear from today are really setting the pace for the nation. They're not looking at averages, they're disaggregating data, they're contextualizing it in their region, and they're forming critical partnerships and strategies to better deliver for students. In particular, I want to thank Cal Competes for their rigorous research that really tells the story of the underserved learner in our state, and to our partners at Strata Education Foundation for unlocking the data that made this research series possible. A couple of housekeeping notes for our time today. First, the session is being recorded and will be shared afterward. And please use the Q&A function, the box at the bottom of your screen, to share any questions that you have throughout. I'll make sure to save about 15 minutes at the end to moderate your questions for the panel. A brief agenda of our time. Over the course of the hour, we will explain what we mean by college ROI. We'll dig into key findings and recommendations from the new research that we launched yesterday, and then we'll jump into a panel discussion, leaving about 15 minutes at the end for your questions. So I really want to just start us by grounding the discussion in why ROI matters. The stakes are high for learners today. Poverty in California is second highest in the nation, and for better or worse, the path to prosperity often runs through post-secondary education. And improving the college payoff matters not only for measuring individual success, but it also helps our system deliver on the promise of opportunity for all Californians. When graduates see a positive ROI, public trust in higher education grows because it's delivering real opportunity. Public and private investments translate into a stronger workforce and state economy. Working learners and their families achieve economic mobility, and equity gaps narrow, which strengthen our communities across generations. If we strengthen ROI for Californians, we uphold post-secondary education's promise as a driver of opportunity and shared prosperity. And with that, I am thrilled to introduce Dr. Sujin Jez, who is the CEO of Cal Competes, a nonpartisan policy and research organization focused on improving outcomes in higher education. She has deep expertise in education policy, finance, data analysis, and her work always centers on equity, strengthening workforce alignment, and increasing economic mobility for students across California. And in addition to all of that, Sujin is just a fantastic partner of College Futures and a great friend in this work. Take it over, Sujin.
Thanks, Amanda. Thank you so much for partnering this work, you and the whole College Futures team. I'm excited to present some new research on the value of higher education, who benefits most, who's left behind, and opportunities to strengthen the return on investment for all Californians. We'll share new data on how ROI varies by region, as well as the research it builds on, which examines differences by race, ethnicity, and sex. For California's economy and communities to thrive, higher education must deliver equitable returns for all learners. And to start, I realize some of you may not be familiar with our organization, California Competes Higher Education for a Strong Economy. So I'm going to take a minute to explain who we are. We are an independent, nonpartisan nonprofit that aims to solve the state's most pressing social and economic problems by conducting rigorous higher education and workforce policy research. We use that research to guide decision makers in designing and implementing solutions to strengthen our economy and help our communities thrive. And as you can see on this slide, we believe long-term economic growth for California will be accomplished through shared prosperity, and that higher education is both a vaccine and an antidote against economic stagnation and social stratification. To that end, we've identified four key issues, our policy priorities. Aligning higher education and workforce to build stronger connections and clearer pathways to well-paying jobs and opportunity. Increasing college access and success for adult learners. Our past research found that there are 6.8 million adult learners with a high school diploma but no college degree, and they're a key part of the solution to meeting our state's workforce needs. And I will flag we are updating that analysis this year, so join our mailing list so you will get an update when that comes out. Promoting agility and innovation in higher education, including through technology enhanced learning and the smart and ethical uses of AI. And fourth, coordinated policy setting and implementation by breaking down silos and fostering greater alignment and intentional collaboration across California's higher education ecosystem and other key policy areas like veterans, workforce, health and human services to better serve the needs of today's students and economy. Okay, on to the research. So I'm excited to share this new research from California Competes that is done in partnership with College Futures Foundation and Strata Education Foundation on how college ROI varies across California's regions. This is the second installment of our Degrees of Value research series, building on previous analysis of differences by race, ethnicity, and sex. Together, these studies illuminate where the system supports learners and where structural barriers leave them behind, helping to inform more equitable higher education and workforce policy. Before we dive into the data, what do we mean by ROI? For the purpose of this research, our definition is the economic premium of a college degree minus its costs. It looks at how much more a college graduate earns over 10 years compared with a typical high school graduate among those employed full-time, then subtracts the average net cost to complete a degree at a public institution. So a college graduate has a positive ROI if they earn enough above a typical high school graduate over this 10-year period to exceed the cost of attending college. To simplify, in other words, if a degree costs 80,000, a college graduate would need to earn at least 80,000 more than a high school graduate within a decade to recoup their investment and see a positive ROI. To note, this research is on a college's economic returns, but we do recognize the value of college has many other dimensions, such as learning new skills, building one's network, and gaining self-confidence. Frankly, also things that probably contribute to economic returns. We want to flag that it's not just economic returns that matter, but economic returns do matter a lot. More on this later. Now, this is one way of measuring ROI, but there is no standard way to quantify it. And I know there are many different studies of ROI and value out there. And to help make this landscape clear, we've compiled the definitions of ROI we've seen, analyzed their similarities and differences, and created this tool, which you can access via that URL, the URL on the slide, or scan that QR code. So reference this when you need to know what ROI means in a given context and to compare different ways of measuring it. Beyond how to measure it, what do we actually know about higher education's ROI? At a high level, college is still worth it. Research consistently shows that college remains a strong investment, more reliable than stocks, bonds, or gold. College graduates experience lower unemployment and significantly higher earnings than those without a degree. But that's not the full story. When you look more closely, the returns are uneven, and that's where policy matters. Our research finds that most California graduates experience a financial payoff from their education within 10 years. And as you can see on this slide, 78% of bachelor's holders and 62% of associate's degree holders see a positive ROI. However, returns differ widely along lines of region, race, ethnicity, sex, and degree type, revealing where opportunity gaps exist and policy action matters most. So next, I'll review these findings from our analyses of ROI, and then I'll share the ones for race, ethnicity, and gender, and then I'll share our new ones by region. So looking at the data on bachelor's degree holders first, what we can see here is white and Asian graduates are more likely to see a positive return, so between 79 and 80%, see a positive return than Black and Latinx graduates, where we see about 73 to 77% see a positive ROI. And men and women experience similar overall rates of return, but racial and ethnic gaps persist within both groups. Variation is more pronounced and more complex when we look at the associate's degree level. Among women, Asian and multiracial graduates, 67 to 75% thereabouts, are more likely to see a positive ROI compared with Black and Latinx women at about 54 to 57%. Among men, however, Black and Latinx graduates, 68 to 76%, fare better than white and Asian men at around 60 to 64%. These differences underscore that outcomes aren't just unequal, they're inconsistent in ways that demand more tailored solutions and more attention. Geography also matters. For bachelor's degree holders, at least 70% see a positive ROI in every single region of the state, ranging from 70% in the Inland Empire to 84% in the Bay Area. And I have to flag, in case you're wondering about those two gray regions, we didn't have enough data to estimate ROI for those regions that are in gray. But in addition to the Bay, degrees pay off most often in other urban coastal regions like Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego, compared to more rural inland regions. You're probably also saying, well, these are the state's economic hubs. And we do find that bachelor's degrees pay off most in areas with robust regional economies. For associate's degrees, the variation is much wider, ranging from 45% in the upper Sacramento Valley to 72% in the Central Coast. And while bachelor's degrees pay off more often than associate's degrees in every region, the size of the gap between bachelor's and associate's positive ROI rates varies significantly. So in this chart, you can see for each region that we had data, the associate's degree and bachelor's degree are positive ROIs. And you can see the length of the bars demonstrates the gap between the associate's degree positive ROI and the bachelor's degree positive ROI. In some regions, like the Inland Empire and Central Coast, a bachelor's degree advantage is modest. By contrast, in other parts of the state, most notably the Upper Sacramento Valley and the Bay Area, the gap is substantially wider. So now that we've looked at disparities across demographic and geographic lines, it begs the question, how do we close these gaps and improve colleges' economic returns for all Californians equitably? Simply put, we can increase graduates' earnings and or decrease students' college costs. But getting there requires coordinated action. We see several timely opportunities to strengthen college ROI to help ensure college fulfills its promise of upward mobility for all. To increase graduates' earnings, we can deepen partnerships with employers and other regional workforce stakeholders so we can strengthen the college to career pathways that lead to strong economic returns, including through work-based learning. We can improve workforce data. So collecting data on hours worked, employee occupation, and job location and type would help us to understand and better evaluate what's happening to college students when they leave our institutions, which would better equip students, institutions, and policymakers with better information so they can design better transitions for students. And in decreasing students' college costs, we can expand financial aid access, including by removing outdated eligibility barriers to state grant aid. Today's students are very different than the students that were going to college when we designed Cal Grant. So many otherwise eligible students are left out of the Cal Grant program because they are too old or more than a year removed from high school, which is now the norm. The typical California college student enrolls 2 years after finishing high school. So doing away with these requirements would help students manage the costs of college. And then it's more than just traditional post-secondary financial aid. We can streamline holistic supports by strengthening students' access to other existing state and federal public investments, from housing, food, and childcare supports to veteran benefits and workforce programs. We did an analysis and found there's over 100 programs that a college student's eligible for that could help defray the cost of college. But getting access to these programs can be really hard because you have to know they exist. They often require different applications and different eligibility requirements. So if we can streamline these supports, we can help students further defray their college costs. So our research adds to a growing body of knowledge that confirms that college delivers value, but it also reveals unfinished work. Higher education continues to open doors, but too many Californians face systemic barriers that prevent their degrees from translating into the economic security they've worked so hard to achieve. So I encourage you to check out the full research series, and I'm happy to answer questions in this webinar, or reach out to me or anyone on the Cal Competes team via email or LinkedIn. And I want to flag that California Competes will be releasing a qualitative study on ROI later this year. This builds on our research on adults who stopped out of college and later returned to finish their credentials. We followed up with those adults 2 years after completion to learn how their degrees have shaped their lives, giving us a more holistic view of ROI. So with that, I will turn it back over to Amanda to kick off the panel discussion.
Thank you, Sujan. You've certainly given us a lot to chew on, and I'm excited to introduce the esteemed panel today. I'm going to start with Dr. Curry, who is the president of Compton College and the CEO of the Compton Community College District. He brings an abundance of energy and innovative ideas to Compton College, along with a wealth of experience as a post-secondary administrator. He's an instrumental partner to Cal Competes in their collaborative work with community college and county partners to strengthen career readiness across LA. Hi, Dr. Curry.
How you doing?
Great. Okay, Joshua Jackson is a college and career advising specialist at Crenshaw High School in LA, supporting students in accessing and completing post-secondary education. He's a product of and practitioner within California's community college system, now on the board of Compton Community College District Foundation, a living example, if you will, of return on investment. And finally, Dr. Ashish Vaidya, who is president and CEO of Growing Inland Achievement, or GIA, which is a regional cross-sector network of leaders. What a mouthful. In the Inland Empire, where I'm from, collectively working to advance educational attainment and socioeconomic mobility in the region from cradle to career pipeline. Okay, let's dig in. I'm going to start with an opening question for all of you to quickly hit. Based on the research that Sujan just talked about, what stands out to you? What's the most urgent challenge for ensuring that college pays off equitably across California? And I'm going to start with Ashish.
Thank you, Amanda. Really glad to be here and be part of this really great panel and a great conversation. And thank you, Sujan, for the wonderful brief and the report. As you said, it keeps adding to the knowledge base that we have. I think one thing that sticks out for me from all this information is, clearly we know that college pays off, right? We know that it's been there, as Sujan mentioned. Multiple areas have shown us, multiple reports have shown us the return on investment is strong, it's consistent, but that payoff is not evenly distributed by region, by race and ethnicity, by gender, and even by degree credential that the students have to choose. So I think it's not just about getting students to get to college. It's about ensuring that access is not just the first step. It is a continuous pathway from beginning to successful transitions to livable wage careers. I'm also struck by the fact that the recommendations and things are not necessarily new, right? We sort of know these things. So it reminded me of something one of my dear friends many years ago said, Ashish, we don't have a knowledge problem, we have an implementation problem. And so I think I go back to saying, what can we do? So for instance, just briefly in the Inland Empire, this pipeline issue actually starts very early. Only 26% of ninth graders are on track to achieve a bachelor's degree, according to the PPIC report that came out last year. Only 57% of our high schoolers enroll in college compared to 65% statewide. So it is about college going, it's about persistence and transfer and navigation along the way. But what I'm hopeful about and optimistic about is that when we get this right in the Inland Empire, it becomes an exceptionally strong proof point for the entire state of California.
Well said, Ashish. Dr. Curry, what would you add?
I think when you get this right in Compton, it becomes a model for the state of California, right? And I say that with all sincerity because I really believe that this work is hard work. This is where the when you look at operationalizing the work that we're doing in California community colleges and also in higher education, the conversation goes to what is return on investment, what's the value, and then with this report talking about what's the value by region, and really having conversations about that of what it looks like within our region as that value, because students are making decisions now regards to, am I going to go to your institution? Will I get a degree from your institution? How much money will I make after I complete that program at your institution? If I transfer, how much money will I make from that other institution after I complete the other institution? And was it worth it? Students are asking those questions, and they're asking it within their own regions. So the question would be, how do we turn this conversation? We have a lot of data, right? We have the College Futures report that came out last fall. We have this report that's out, and there's some national reports as well. How do we take these reports and operationalize these reports within our institutions? And I think this is where the next step of this conversation. So yes, this report is very helpful to be able to talk about regions and what needs to happen. But the question is, how do you operationalize this at the college level, but then also within a region where you're doing regional work with other colleges and also with industry? Because at some point, it got to be move away from conversation to action, because our enrollment depends on the question being answered around the value of our programs, but also to our local enrollment is important. So when we're talking about students who are in dual enrollment, what's the value of going to a community college after I complete dual enrollment to complete my degree? Or if you're talking about a first-time freshman first-time student who's coming from a local school district, what does that look like? And why would I go to a college within my neighborhood if that neighborhood college does not show a value? It's all about recruitment.
Well, I'm excited to dig into several of the things you said there, Dr. Curry. But in the meantime, let's go to Joshua. From the hat that you wear, what do you see as the greatest challenge provoked from this research?
Well, I think to build off the previous two speakers, I think it's about how we actually position students to utilize this data, right? And so I can say from my experience, students will come into our college center, every day, and they're choosing or they aspire to some of the higher income earning majors that are available. They want to be nurses because they want to see the world be a better place, or they want to go into those majors. However, when we talk about access to those, right, and what it takes, the actual prep work that it does to make themselves competitive in those majors, this information is not always available. So I work with students before they even enroll, right? And many of those students that I serve, and not just in Crenshaw, but I've been able to work in a lot of the schools in the Central South LA area, Washington Prep, Augustus Hawkins. A lot of them are dealing with instability, right? Whether that be financial instability or even housing, right? And so we look at college as a way, the more that students are able to engage in college, the more likely they are to complete it, earn better, and persist. But that engagement itself is shaped by the stability that they see, right? And so for me, when it talks to advising students or talking them through, a lot of what the research we even show is that they're not necessarily decision or being neutral, but they're being sorted into different opportunities and different levels of opportunities for students. So when they enroll and what majors they can access ultimately shape their outcomes, right? And so when I look about return on investment, it isn't just about going to college, but it's about institutional and major access, right? In which we see in the data is stratified by income and race. So I think for me, one of the things that we talk about with students is that, when they're applying for financial aid, or sometimes those students will, because of the instability, make choices or be forced to make certain choices. And then our schools were evaluating on if they're completing the FAFSA application, or as part of high school graduation rates, or they're completing the college application, whether those colleges are our university that are actually sustainable for their needs. I've seen high performing students, disenroll from 4-year schools from lack of financial reasons or coordinated support. I've also seen how those same instabilities shape them before they even reach that point. So we need to make sure in the same way that we're ensuring that students are not only attending college, but they're able to complete it, right? And so that's my biggest takeaway.
Thanks for bringing that kind of holistic perspective there. I really appreciate it. Sujan, you want to round us out with this opening question?
Happy to. And I think it builds off of all of the previous panelists' comments and feedback. And I think the sort of the pays off equitably, like focusing on that equity piece around, college pays off generally, but really digging in. And when I look at sort of the returns for a bachelor's degree for Latinx Californians, when I see what's happening in the Inland Empire, I do think we need to really begin to unpack, as Josh was talking about, what's going on with students that's causing this gap, or frankly how are institutions not responding to the needs of students in communities, and then thinking about President Curry's comments, like it really is the how then do institutions, which were designed for a very different population and moment, I mean, how do we rethink what institutions are doing today to serve the students that Joshua is working with every day in high school? And also I imagine she's working with adult learners, Compton College with adult learners too. What do those pathways look like? How do we help students get in? And I'll flag that our ROI work looks at completers. So thank you, Joshua, for flagging. Like so many students that enter our institutions and don't finish, and their ROI, I'm pretty confident saying that is much worse. So there's a real, I think, focus on equity here and digging in that we need to be really intentional around our solutions and how we what we identify and then how we roll them out.
Thank you so much, Sujan. And I actually want to dig in there. So I'm going to turn to you, Dr. Curry. You and I have a partnership brewing that will enable you to move from talking about ROI from your leadership perch to actually integrating strategy into your campus and your region. So can you talk about how you've leveraged ROI data from all the sources you mentioned to approach your work on behalf of student success at Compton?
So yeah, it's brewing. I'm a little late on some stuff, but it's brewing very well. I would say that I've been following the ROI conversation for over a year and a half. It all started with the College Futures Foundation reports based off the CSU and the 4-year colleges. And so I was trying to really understand what it meant regards to return on investment, economic mobility. Then I saw a report that came out last fall regards to community colleges, which showed that our return on investment for Compton College was 13 years for students to be able to recoup. And when you first start talking about the data, people, it's like, what was the methodology? People want to ask questions about methodology, this, that, and the other. Is it right? What did we do wrong? What's going on? But at the end of the day, you can see it based off of student completion. You can see when students are taking over 90 units at your institution that has maximized their Pell Grant opportunities, have taken out exceeding amount of loans at a 2-year college. You can see that when students do not have an educational plan, or you can see that students are taking their 3rd year, taking a transfer level English and math. So you can start to see from conversation about return on investments, what are some of those barriers that you have on your campus as relates to that? And so what we have done at Compton College is really looking at our strategic master plan, which is Compton 2035, working with our planning consultant to create our own return on investment economic mobility framework. I think it's very important you start looking at the regional data, you start looking at colleges' data, but I think colleges have to be able to articulate their story regards to return on investment, economic mobility for their programs, but then also be able to look at that, how does it impact their support programs? What I mean by that is regards to how does it impact those support programs. If you're in an EOPS and CARE program and you're providing students with book vouchers, but you don't see a recoup on their investment because students are still taking out loans, then what does it look like for affordability? And why do you reallocate some of your resources to support those students to erase some of that debt? So we have to be able to figure out new ways to look at return on investment, economic mobility as an institution, creating your own framework for your academic programs that can also be applied to your student support services programs. connected to your strategic master plan for your institution, but also connected to your program plans and your annual program plans and also program review. But at the same time, looking at all the barriers that you have on your campus that are impacting student success. I'll give you a couple. One, look at the number of students who have educational plans, comprehensive educational plans, not abbreviated, right? How many students have educational plans and what are being done? At community college, we learned that 70% of our students do not have educational plans. When I talk to some of my colleagues, they will say, oh, we probably have the same number, but I'm proud enough to say this is our number. Also, you can say how many students are completing their orientation. How many students are applying for state aid and also federal aid at your institution? How many students are applying for loans at your institution and also for what programs that students are applying for loans? We're seeing students in cosmetology, child development, and automotive applying for loans. What is the return on investment economic ability for those students in those programs? How are you able to erase that debt for students in those programs that might not yield a return on investment, but are also good for the community? Maybe you redesign your scholarship program and say, you know what, STEM students, you're not able to get scholarship money from someplace else, but also you get state aid. Maybe you redirect some of your scholarship money to programs that show that there's a lesser value. So the key to this is being able to talk about this as an institution, about what this looks like, creating your own framework, but then also bringing in a faculty to have conversation early on. And as I talked to faculty in our academic senate, they had several meetings in the fall, having a presentation on data. They had the statewide academic senate come in and have a conversation, and they have been design partners with us as relates to this. Everyone goes back to looking at return on investment economic mobility, saying, are you cutting programs? No, we're trying to figure out a way to help programs, right? Trying to figure out the way to help programs, but then also thinking about how do we market those programs in our community? How do we show that this is a value? And the last piece of this, I would say, looks at how do you do workforce development on your campus? I know there's a question later on, but our board of trustees just approved the redesign of a workforce development. Workforce development is not just about career and technical education. How do you apply workforce development work throughout all your academic divisions? And at Compton College, I'd say based off our Guided Pathways division. How do you make sure that you have apprenticeship specialists, job placement people that across disciplines that are working with industry to bring in partners to work with students across all disciplines, not just CTE? So really look at that redesign of your institution to support to support job placement and employment. So it can be done by creating a framework for your institution that applies to academic and support programs, looking at what the barriers are at your institution that students are not successful because these are barriers that you have, but you're not wanting to talk about. Then you're looking at how do you design and support strong workforce development across all Guided Pathways divisions. And the last piece of this is looking at how do you strengthen the funding to support it, making sure that all the funding is on the table. I know that I saw Dr. Markejian on the call with the Los Angeles Regional Consortium. We did our bylaws, which says that for some of our programming can support return on investment economic ability. So that's another funding opportunity to support the work that we're doing at our campuses, but also in the region. So you have to align resources to this work. I hope that answers your question.
Ooh, so much I could pick up on. I really appreciate kind of the soup to nuts answer there and really thinking about how you're redesigning and integrating your student support programs with kind of the academic program side of the house. I think that that's a model, frankly, for the nation. So thank you. Joshua, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to think about kind of the flip side of the coin there and really put yourself in the shoes of a learner trying to make decisions. Drawing from your work as a college counselor and from your own experience, how can we better equip students with the data they need to make college and career decisions that result in a positive ROI?
Well, I kind of hinted at it earlier when I was reviewing, a lot of the research. It was affirming for me first as a student, navigating these systems of higher education, K through 12, but then also as a practitioner, and thinking about how many of our students, in terms of support programs, a lot of times we see that these programs can work in silos, or these systems of support can work in silos when many of our students need those to work together in unison, right? And when they're getting into those 4 years. So for me, I'll always say that, when students first and are thinking about college, if I meet a student, you can meet them at different points, but if I meet a student in ninth grade, right, a lot of the times they're going to associate with majors. One of the populars is always real estate, because they link that to better economic mobility or nursing or being doctors or lawyers, which are all great things that they should aspire to. Then as we move through, we always talk about the lack of their awareness comes from the support program, right? And oftentimes, if we're not careful as advisors, whether it be in the college or the career side, if we're not speaking to those things that are going to help them maintain and sustain while they're in school, they're going there with an expectation or a lack of awareness of the things that they may, come in contact with. So for me as an advisor, I think that when you're talking about the ROI conversation, it has to lead with the engagement of students. How are we positioning them to receive this information? How are we informing them how to make tangible decisions making, right? A lot of the times I've seen students for our California public schools, and I'm always, a big proponent. I think we all are California residents and tuning California institutions of higher education, right? But in the Crenshaw, where there's a strong cultural pride and history there, right? They'll oftentimes look at their financial risk or they'll look at the cultural risk and want to make other decisions that may not be in their best mind because they're not thinking about the support that's there, right? They're assuming that, but they don't know what that looks like at a 4-year school. And I think that comes with, if we're having this ROI conversation, it has to include partnering with these K through 12 systems that are helping, equipping, and sharing these informations in real time because students are making decisions. Right now, we're on, as we say, our road to decision day, May 1st, where students are evaluating their financial aid award letter. They're evaluating what their fit will be on these campuses when they get there, who they'll live with, if their friends are going, all of these different things that influence their decisions. And now is the most critical time for me as we talk about, right, what support there is, what does the data show, and using data as a college and career advising specialist to point them and give them and equip them with the information to make informed decisions. And I think that's really critical, that piece where we're collaborating with K through 12. I was just having a conversation with a mentor of mine, Dr. Taiwan Howard, who works in this space, and we were talking about how college was a viable option for us, and even as the data shows, it's still a viable option. But for some of our students in the most vulnerable spaces, that question is if it is, rather the data says that their circumstances may not see it. And so I think it's connecting what they see and what they know into what's the reality that they position themselves in.
Thank you so much. I've been saying lately, how do we move beyond making value visible to making it viable, right? And thinking about kind of how we empower learners and the systems wrapped around them to succeed, I think is such an important conversation. Sujin, you gave us a little teaser about the listening to learners research that's coming up, and I think that connects to what Joshua just mentioned. Do you just want to riff a bit more on what you've been hearing so far?
Yeah, and I will say so what we've been hearing with regards to this comebacker studies, real value, I mean, economic mobility comes out clearly, but also around durable skills, around self-confidence, around I feel like occupational stability, that people may not be able to be earning more money, but they could leave a job to go to another job. They don't feel, they have that freedom, is really coming out. So look for that work coming out, I think early fall, late summer. And then our earlier listening to learners work that we did in partnership with College Futures and Strada Education Foundation found that students, alumni said that career guidance often came too late. And so if we can get students this information, and I will say it's not just like labor market information around, here's what this job pays, but also career guidance in the form of work-based learning, to be able to, have an internship, to be in the workplace and see what it's actually like, to have a guest lecturer from that profession come and speak to you, to have coffee conversations. There are so many ways that institutions can implement career guidance for students. And I really appreciate President Curry's flag that, workforce development isn't just a CTE function, it's a campus-wide responsibility. And we should be really thinking about students' occupational career pathways regardless of what they major in. Because nearly every student is going to want to have a job and a good job. And there are many ways we focus on earnings, but benefits, stability, culture, et cetera, around a good job, what it means. And for those students that don't want a job, great. I don't think we need to think about or design for them. But nearly everyone wants a good job, regardless of what you major in. So I think as much as we could say, hey, student, study the thing that drives you, that you're curious about, and we're going to help you make sure that that's going to lead to something that doesn't leave you in poverty at the end. I think is really wonderful because I think so many students are really stressed out right now about what's the job that's going to pay well, not where am I going to learn and grow and develop as a Californian, as a scholar, as a community member. And so I think that would be a really powerful thing that if I was going to say, if we could figure this out, but when we figure this out,
Love it.
for students.
Yes, great optimism. Okay, Ashish, I want to turn to you to talk just a little bit about kind of bring us in on what this conversation looks like in a region. What have you learned about what it takes to make a partnership work between employers, between higher ed, between community organizations and policymakers?
Yeah, no, that's a great segue. A little bit of a context of growing in achievement. We were formed just about 10 years ago, thanks to some great efforts by College Futures and others who came together to really come to the conclusion that this is a complex social challenge, educational attainment and economic mobility. No single institution can address it on its own. We need to go beyond isolated impact to systemic, large-scale, sustainable change. And that's not going to happen if people work in silos. We have cross-sector linkages that are critical to be aware of to see where the transition points are a challenge, where we can strengthen them. And I think that's really the importance of sort of this regional collaborative approach to thinking about this problem. And I believe that it has been very successful. We have work still to be done. We certainly know that. But I think the foresight and the vision that all the folks who came together, the education leaders, the business leaders, the community-based leaders, to say, listen, the Inland Empire is a region of consequence. And in order for us to jumpstart and accelerate our educational attainment, we're going to need to do this. And the notion of taking a collective impact framework, we rally around a common agenda. We had shared data. We've talked a lot about that already. Shared data and measurement systems. We have shared accountability, holding folks accountable for not just pointing fingers to say, look, how can we do this? The student journey is not restricted to one geographical area or a zip code. Students will move from a school district to a community college to a four-year and then eventually to a job. We in the Inland Empire want them to remain in the IE. We think of ourselves as a pull-up region, so we want to really make sure that we're building the talent pool in that. So what we've discovered, I think, Amanda, is partnerships work when there is perhaps a bold aspirational goal. So GIA, working in collaboration with the region, came up with the 70% of working age adults will have a degree or credential of value. That is California's goal. We believe that California is not going to meet its goal unless the Inland Empire aspires to that same goal. It's a crisp, clear vision of our North Star. And so the question then is, how do we align activities? How do we align our systems? How do we align all the different things that have to work? And we're slowly going towards that direction. Most students in the Inland Empire start at a community college, which means transfer becomes an extremely important issue, not an afterthought. We have to focus on that as much as our labor market structure is such that, frankly, there are quite a few jobs, especially in the warehousing, logistics industry, even some healthcare, where you don't even need a post-secondary degree or credential to get a job. So from a student's perspective, the short-term payoff is right away there without looking at the long-term horizon. But I'm very optimistic that we are looking at ways in which across building these partnerships, cross-sector, from early career-connected advising and learning from high school, all the way to persistence and transfer, and then to find livable wage careers with working with employer-led solutions and business engagement. So I think it's going to be a very important story, but I think the regional collaboration is the heart of the story.
Regional collaboration is the heart of the story, I think will be a quote of the webinar. So thank you so much, Ashish. We got an excellent question in the chat. And actually, while Dr. Curry was speaking earlier, he mentioned those programs that might not lead to strong ROI at the individual level, but really serve an important purpose in their community. And our partner, Dr. Mina Dagger at Equity Solutions, has been working on this framework. We call it she calls it the dual value framework, thinking about how to reconcile and build structured resources around places where there's, community value, but the individual value is not keeping up. And so she asks a great question about, would love thinking from all the panelists about additional levers at the college, regional, and state level to ensure community value is not created at the expense of low-income students. So if anything comes to you, what levers do you think we should be thinking about there?
Is this about careers that don't pay as well, like education, care, economy?
Exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
my quick thought is, like much of the rest of the world is we subsidize wages and subsidize costs. Um, we know that there are lots of places that the market fails, and that feels like, the clear one.
Would say for me, the one that I think a lot about is child development, right? And how do you create partnerships? We're doing access and work with Cal State Dominguez Hills, Common Unified School District, Linwood Unified School District, and Paramount Unified School District around teacher prep. And how do we market teacher preparation to individuals who are interested in child development? But then also looking at how do you explain to students early on about their major, about the wages, give them all the information up front that this is the number of units you need to complete to reduce the debt as much as possible, right? Because students who are in child development, that's the career that they want. I think as leaders, we don't want to deter them from the career that they want because of the value. We want to make sure that we're able to reduce all costs for those students to ensure that once they complete the degree, they're not leaving with debt. Here's the reason why this is important when I look at child development. We had a student who graduated from our institution, had over 100 units. Child development was their major. They transferred to a CSU campus to transfer into child development. They're taking out loans. They have maximized their Pell. So when you talk about the recoup and the return on investment, how long is it going to take for the student to recoup that amount? So as leaders, we have to figure out ways to say, you know what, we're going to meet with the child development faculty at the beginning of the year. We're going to make sure all child development students have their educational plans. We're going to make sure all child development students are looking at opportunities to do internships, apprenticeships, and job placements while they're at community college with child development agencies early on so they're able to have employment while they work. We're also going to look at how do we increase the number of scholarships for students who are in child development to make sure that they're able to reduce their costs, but also making sure that they maximize all state and federal aid. So looking at, did they apply for state and federal aid, but also trying to make sure they're not applying for loans because that's going to increase their debt. So what I look at is how do we be proactive instead of being reactive? But then also, too, how do we study what other people are doing in other states? I was having a conversation with colleagues from Colorado Mountain, and they're looking at child development as an apprenticeship program versus an academic program at their institution. How can they do that to be able to reduce the cost for students at an apprenticeship program where individuals are able to get jobs but are leaving with no debt?
I will say that First Five Alameda County, I believe, has a program just like that.
And so but I think we have to be able to have these conversations about new ways to support our students. And I want to be clear about this. It's not about program reduction. It's about how do we look at the value and how do we make sure students are completing these programs in a timely manner, but also being honest with ourselves, right? We have to be honest with ourselves that some of these programs that we offer do not lead to a return on investment, but they're needed within our community, right? But also, too, we got to advocate statewide because to me, it's interesting how child development, we know at the early age who we need to be supporting our students, and they're one of the lowest paid jobs out there. That's a problem.
A major systemic problem and one where policy should absolutely be implicated. So thank you so much for calling attention to that. Um, there have been a couple other great questions in the chat. One of them's been answered via chat, but I also want to get to this question about AI. Sujan, I know you've been thinking a lot in this space, so I'm going to turn to you. How will college ROI be affected by AI?
I mean, well, part of me is like, who knows? But here are some things that I think, directionally we have a good sense around and thinking about the two components of ROI, like the costs and then the earnings. I mean, as institutions, as the state begin to leverage AI to, reduce their costs, perhaps like around administrative functions, we're seeing cool work by Attain and Zach Pardos around the use of AI for course articulation to facilitate transfer. And, students can get through faster, not retake courses, et cetera. That reduces the students' costs and increases their ROI. And I think the questions around like jobs, the labor market, I'm guessing that's probably where the question was more is what does the labor market look like for students, particularly I think as the conversations around AI's impact on entry-level jobs, particularly white collar entry-level jobs that, college degrees, students with college degrees or graduates with college degrees tend to go into. It's mixed. It's not certain. We don't have great data, but it doesn't look what we see doesn't look good, but it's still very early on. I'm gonna put in chat, I feel like a great summary from Bharat Chandar that looks at sort of what do we know about AI and labor markets, which I think is really useful. But I think what I want to I think emphasize is we're at a moment where we should be designing what we want from AI and ROI and the labor market. I definitely feel like this is not destiny, that we're at this point where we should be thinking about how can AI drive improved ROI, and then how do we make that happen? And thinking about sort of like, I think the productivity questions that people are raising, is it going to be job loss? Or can we do more? And those are choices that business leaders, that policymakers, that institutions can make decisions on today.
I
So
love,
can I add one thing on this one?
of
And
course.
this is I gotta say I give my colleague Mike Munoz credit for this. Mike Munoz, president Long Beach City College. Um, that's my guy. I just want to say that when you think about ROI and AI, I think we need to think about something. If AI booms and works, that means you'll have more displaced workers in certain areas, but then also we have funding at our institutions because the state of California is driven off the stock market and our revenues. If it fails, our institutions are going to have trouble because of funding, because the revenue will not be there. So when I think about AI in this conversation in space, one, it has to succeed, but two, we have to prepare our students as it relates to some of these AI jobs, but also knowing that some jobs that we're currently doing right now might not exist in the future. So that means at our institutions, we have to be able to pivot a lot faster. And we can't be waiting a year or 2 years for new curriculum for some of these programs that we're going to need for our students to be able to get employment in this new environment. So I would say is one, we got to be dependent on AI because of the revenue for the state of California. Let's be honest about that, because that funds higher education and also K-12. But at the same time, we got to be able to pivot as it relates to new job opportunities for our students. So we have to get curriculum developed very quickly, but also we have to train our faculty for that curriculum and how that's going to look. But we got to pivot. We can't be waiting 2 or 3 years for programs to be created. We got to be able to pivot in less than 6 to 9 months, if that. If not, these for-profit institutions are going to pivot faster, and our students are going to go to those institutions, and we think about return on investment, economic mobility, they're going to leave with more debt. Nothing saying about the for-profits and those institutions, but the data is real about the debt students leave with, particularly Black students.
Amanda, I'll just jump in very quickly on the AI question because I think it's an important one. And I think we made a little bit of a reference to this. I think I'm more and more convinced by looking at some of the research and the data and the analysis that the best way to prepare an AI-enabled workforce is to really have a strong foundation in both AI literacy and durable skills. We talked a lot about the durable skills issue, the issue of creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, the buzzword for today, right? And I think from our educational standpoint, doing that early and often is going to be the key. In other words, all the way from high school onwards to 2-year, 4-year making sure that we are integrating both durable skills and AI skills so that we really create a workforce that can actually, as Keith mentioned, can actually augment and enhance the AI tools and resources rather than be subject to job loss and all those kinds of things. So back to the fundamentals of core competencies and durable skills.
Mm, thanks, Ashish. And I would be remiss if I didn't selfishly plug a blog series that our entrepreneur in residence, Maria Anguiano, has been writing on this topic. So highly recommend folks check that out. I'm going to have us close out with one quick kind of whip around question and give us some optimism. So the main takeaway from this research is that college delivers value for most learners. And it's not an even experience across our state. So, what do you see as the one key opportunity from your vantage point?
Say we give us the opportunity to redesign our institutions as you build off the guided pathways work. And there was another book that came out from QB College Research Center regards to at Columbia Teachers College regards to return on investment, economic mobility, and workforce development. It gives an opportunity to redesign our organizations to be able to support this work, and you're also able to look at your resources and how you allocate. At the end of the day, if we don't address systems, policies, and structures at our institutions, to really look at student completion and also return on investment, in 10 years, we'll be blamed because we didn't do our job. We have to take this head on and say we have to focus on that. But you have to reorg your organization to make sure that you're focused on this work.
Amazing. Redesign, reallocate resources, reorg. Ashish, let's go to you.
I was going to say actually just piggyback on what Keith mentioned. As an economist by training, I'd like to think about, have we aligned incentives and reward structures to meet this goal? I think Sujan might agree with this notion that part of the accountability is to hold our institutions and our sectors responsible for this. This is a shared responsibility. So rather than just say it's based on enrollment, but it should be based on outcomes. So I think one big opportunity is to make sure that we align our incentive and reward structure to actually reward collaboration. It's not often done. Actually reward what people coming together and finding a shared solution to this kind of thing. One last thing I'll send, so I saw it in a blog very recently on LinkedIn. We focus a lot on degrees and credentials of value, but we should also be focused on connections of value. Especially for the kinds of students we are talking about, those can be the difference between actually getting a high paying quality job or an experience, a work-based experience or not. So a lot of good work in connections of value along with credentials of value.
Incredible. Thank you for adding that. Joshua, let's go to you, and then Sujan, you can close us out.
Absolutely. I would say I think we had a pivotal time where we get to redesign and reimagine what these again, like what these collaborations and what these outcomes for students look like to make all of the options that they may have for post-secondary achievement, whether that be college, workforce, to make them viable and make students feel fulfilled and have long-term economic mobility.
To close this out, I will say that, this work is not easy, but I feel like it is to me at least, the right kind of hard. And so I'm enthusiastic about all the attention towards us. And I want to double click on Ashisha's comment about the connections and relationships. I think will be even more important in this moment of wherever AI goes. And I think that really underscores these things are cross-cutting, but everyone's mentioning, and whatever way you mention ROI, when we dig in, I really think it gets to these pieces, and we know that's how people get jobs. It's these relationships and connections. And so yeah, I just appreciate the attention, and I think the recognition that college matters and we have some work to do.
That's right, Sujan, and the agenda continues. Well, I want to thank you all very much for spending an hour with us today. Panelists, you were awesome. You gave us a lot of great ideas to pick up on. Thank you to Cal Competes for this research. Thank you for bringing us together. And I encourage everybody who attended today to dig into the brief and follow up with any of us with any questions, thoughts, and ideas. Thank you so much. Take care and talk to you soon.